welcome to Artwork, a conversation with creative people about the joys, the challenges, and the mundane moments of living an artistic life. We're your hosts. I'm Poppy Rose.
And I'm Brea Robertson.
And our artist today is Bente Lorentzen.
Bente is a Norwegian musician and activist from the stunning Lofoten Islands in the north of Norway. However, she's currently based in Berlin. At the moment, she's involved in 3 amazing musical projects. Firstly, her solo project, Miss Nöyd, a tender, melancholic folk pop project with traces of nostalgic longing, tired memories, and dreamy ocean waves.
Bente also plays electric guitar in the wild post-punk group La Laguna. They describe their performances as what glitter tastes like. The international four-piece met here in Berlin with the dreamy idea to turn the grey Berlin winter into a blossoming jellyfish garden.
And thirdly, she's part of the trio the Cameltoes, well known in Norway for their crazy shows and humorous political messages delivered through true raw Norwegian punk.
Before moving to Berlin, Bente spent years working for the Norwegian environmental organisation, the People's Action for an Oil-Free Future, fighting against the Norwegian government's plans of drilling for oil in the pristine Lofoten Islands.
She's a fascinating woman with an incredible passion for making a positive impact in the world, and we can't wait to share this conversation with you.
Let's dive in. So you're from Norway. Tell us about how it was growing up in Lofoten.
Yeah, so like you say, I'm from an area in Norway called the Lofoten Islands, which is quite far north in Norway. So it's above the Arctic Circle. So we have the magical nature with the northern lights in the winter and the never-ending midnight sun in the summer. So it's quite inspiring place to grow up in. At the same time, though, there's almost no people living there. So I'm from a tiny island called Henningsvær, which is like a fishing village. And we are 500 people living there. So the contrast between Henningsvær, this tiny village, and Berlin, the city I'm living in right now, is quite big, you can say.
Yeah, I would say so. Wow.
Yeah, it's very dramatic in many ways, but I do find it interesting because when you grow up there, I think that's for a lot of people, you don't necessarily understand what's surrounding you. So I remember very clearly the first time I kind of had a different perspective on where I was living. I was taking the bus to visit my dentist, and the bus ride was like 40 minutes, and then I had to take a ferry for 20 minutes. And I was probably around 13, 14 years old. And there was this extremely cool French couple, probably in their like early 20s, sitting in the bus in front of me. And there's like almost no people in these buses either. So I was kind of paying attention to them. And as we entered this very narrow fjord where the mountains are just like dramatically rising up to the sky and the ocean is down below, you could see this couple just being so mesmerized by this insane, dramatic nature. And I think that was maybe the first moment where I was like, okay, there's probably something special about this. But when you grow up in it, all you think about is like, this is so boring. What can I do? Like, what can you use a mountain for? Unless you are extremely sporty and active and like running up there every day. But normally as a teenager, you're more interested in wanting to meet new cool people or listen to the new music. So I always had this like longing for something more where you feel connected to people and not only the nature. So it's more the recent years and later in life that you're also realizing how powerful these magnificent nature surroundings are and how they have how they meant something to you when you grow up, but you probably don't realize what they mean until you step back from it a little bit.
Or growing up in such a dramatic, natural place, has that impacted the music that you write or the art that you create later on in life?
Yeah, I do think so, but it's more. I think it's hard to say. Like the place I'm from, in many ways, the nature and the culture is so intertwined. So it's probably hard to say that the one or the other aspect of it really influenced my music, but I definitely feel that there's some kind of melancholy and some kind of longing and nostalgia within my indie folk project that really echoes this traditional and historical culture that I grew up with, which is the fishing families, and how when growing up I kind of knew the story of the fishermen and the fisher wives and how they have to live with the nature, but also were fighting against the nature constantly in order to survive, to get enough food, to build their homes basically in a very rough environment. So I do think there's some kind of course, it depends on who's listening to my songs, but I do think you can find some kind of longing within the lyrics or within the melodies that I choose that are the so-called Nordic melancholy. Because of the dramatic nature in Lofoten, it's very attractive for a lot of creative people. So we have a lot of artists coming to the area to live there and to either paint or create their silver jewelry or create their abstract music, or just being part of this very creative environment compared to how many people actually living in the area. And growing up, I always wanted to do music. I remember being really eager and wanting to sing and wanting to become some kind of musician. But to be honest, I just never had the guts to go for it. I think I always applied for something else because I was too afraid to step into like actually studying music. So I didn't study music. But we did have quite an important culture school, like where you could take some evening classes. And there was this English lady called Margaret, who was like a firework of a woman who just managed to put up like an annual musical for all the kids within the community. So we all went in on this big project, and everyone got either to sing an instrument or play an instrument, or sing, or just be part of this like production of a musical. And I do think that gave me some courage in order to pursue music maybe later in life. But for not until I was like in my late 20s, I started doing music. And then I remember applying for a music school every year and actually got in, but just declined it because I was afraid, but also because I guess the main point was at the time I was head of an environmental organization in Norway. And we were fighting against oil production in the Lofoten Islands. Because as you're aware of, or most people are aware of, Norway is quite a big oil production country.
Yeah.
And we do offshore drilling. So it's because we have this long coastal line where we have a lot of oil and gas resources outside of the coast. And for 50 years now, we've managed to use a lot of this, or sell a lot of this oil, and build up this oil fund that we can use to build like a good society with healthcare and school systems. But then the backside of that medal, if you can call it that, is of course that we've also responsible for a lot of climate pollution. And as the areas in the south of Norway were getting emptied for oil, the industry was pushing further north and then into some of these very special and vulnerable nature areas where all of the biggest fish stocks are spawning and where all the whales are swimming to feed, where we have all of our beautiful seabirds. And if there were to happen an oil catastrophe in that area, we would have ruined all of our communities in the north. So this has been like a constant political battle for me, probably from age 16 until today.
So when were you first made aware of this issue, and when did it first become personal that you wanted to do something about it?
I think I was around probably like 15, 16 or something.
Wow.
And we started to be aware of that they were planning, that the oil companies were planning to research if they could find any oil using this seismic activity, where they basically just they use very loud air cannons to map if there's oil and gas underneath the surface. Underneath the surface. But this seismic activity frightens fish and whale. So if they were to do it in our area, the direct consequence was that all of our fishermen would lose their job for that year, potentially for several years. So it was quite like a personal impact having a family with where my grandfather was a fisherman and he was a fisherman his entire life. So from quite early on, we were talking about how scared we were of the consequences of this industry potentially entering our backyard and being a threat not only to our nature but to to our history and tradition and how we live in that area.
Using your passion for the climate and using your passion for music and bringing those two together, how did that happen?
When I was working as a leader for this organization called Oil Free Future for Lofoten Islands. And at the time, I met two amazing girls who were, one of them was studying film at this great film school that's in my area. And the other one was working for Friends of the Earth. And she was working with fisheries and the politics of fisheries. And then we were discussing the fact that none of us never started any bands during our teenage years. And we were
missed
just
that initiation.
yeah, we were like contemplating, like all of our friends were boys. They just had all of these bands, and we just never did that. And then like, why didn't we do that again? And we were just like thinking about that, figuring out our personal reasons, but also, of course, talking about the threshold for females to step into a very male-oriented rock scene, especially because we all, since it's such a small group of people, we were all agreeing that we've never had any friends saying like, no, you can't join a band, or no, you're not allowed to. But there's still this threshold that's higher for us in order to just fuck around and play with music.
Yeah.
And then for some reason we ended up starting a punk band called the Cameltoes, where where
I love the name.
yeah, I don't remember quite how we got there, but when the name was in our heads, we were like, of course, we're called the Cameltoes. Like, what else
This
can
is
we
it.
call? Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, and it was very fun, especially in the beginning, because of course it just started with us having shows in the backyard of a summer party and just playing for our friends, and our lyrics are in Northern Norwegian dialect, and the topics of the lyrics are that the bassist had gluten intolerance and therefore had diarrhea all the time, all the way to female masturbation and how you're frustrated that when you're having sex, they just don't understand how the female body is working. So there's always been like
That's brilliant.
a political approach to the ban, but it's always based on humor and whatever we think about that day. It's never planned in any way. It's very immediate in its reaction to something.
Yeah.
And in its action. And I do think that's why it's so fun to do it.
Yeah, I think I really struggle with like having that freedom with songwriting or with kind of anything and just being so spontaneous. I think that's so cool that you just have an idea and just run with it. I really admire that.
And I do think that's the freedom of punk. And I do think that's also the freedom that a lot of female musicians feel they have to search for in a different way than male musicians. Like, how many times have you walked into a party and if there's a guitar, a dude grabs the guitar, sing his lungs out, and there's nothing wrong in that. That's beautiful. It's just sad that we aren't doing it in the same way, and that we kind of need to think through and ask for, are you sure it's okay that I'm picking up this guitar, because maybe I'll be too loud even before start singing it. And I'm talking in very stereotypical, like, broad here, but that was the notion that when we started the Cameltoes, that was kind of what we felt. And then quite early in our journey, we were picked 1 out of 10 bands to play in this competition where all the festivals in Northern Norway, like a showcase, where they were picking out some bands to play for their festivals. And I remember that very clearly because we were 10 bands playing, and we had this like pre-talk before everyone was going on stage, I mean. And out of the 10 representatives from the Norwegian festivals, there was only one female. And she stepped into the room after all of the guys had, like, they just presented their festivals, like, this is our festival, this is what we're looking for tonight. And when she took the stage, she was just like, hey, I just want you to look around the room and just notice that I'm the only female booking manager here. I'm the only female booker for a festival. And there's like 2 or 3 female acts here tonight. And she wasn't making anyone feeling bad about their presence, unless they personally felt that they should. But she was just underlining this balance that's not there in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the reaction of the people in your area to the music you were playing?
A lot of good laughs, but not in like a negative way. More in like, this is very funny. I want to be part of this. This is an invite for me to do a mosh pit or just stand in the background and look at this hilarious show, but also listening to what we are saying. in a way.
How long did you play together?
We played together for. I mean, we're kind of still playing. This is the irony of the Cameltoes, because we I think we played maybe like once or twice a year, and every time we played, we call it a reunion, because we're basically not, like, for example, now I'm living in Berlin, the drummer is in Oslo, and the bassist is in Tromsø, which is quite far north in Norway. So we were never living in the same city. So we only rehearsed like the week before doing a festival or the week before doing a show. And that doesn't matter because it's also part of the punk message for us.
With the punk and with the things that you were talking about, did you have an intention to push boundaries or to challenge ideals? Was that something that you consciously wanted to do through your music?
With the Cameltoes, we absolutely want to say something and make an impact. And I guess the more recent example of that is now we haven't played together for 2 years, but actually today in the Norwegian Parliament, they're going to vote over a really important paper saying something about how the Norwegian fishery policies are going to be for the next probably 10 years. Wow. And it's been like years of battle against this kind of paper, because in reality, it allows bigger companies to just take all the fish and then not even land it in Norway, which means that you could just have like a huge fish right outside my area and then just take the fish to another country, and then not creating any jobs or not making it possible for people to live in my home area, for example. And then we use for the Cameltoes, then we create a song about fish, which is silly and funny, where the chorus is just like, the chorus line is basically fish, 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 fish. That's it. But then by creating a video like that during COVID now, where we're using Zoom, we're using our abilities to create a fun video, posting it online, and creating like a 2-minute silly punk song about a topic that's like 50 pages of really heavy political language about how they're gonna regulate the fisheries of Norway. And we're kind of like being able to connect this like heavy, boring political processes with something that's really fun and expressing anger, but also like positive engagement.
Yeah.
And I do think that's what I love about these kinds of projects, because we were also part of this bigger live stream from something called the Coastal Rebellions, which is basically all the tiny communities along the coast of northern Norway going together, organizing, saying like, you can't take our fish away. And then this video was part of a bigger live stream, just watching that live streaming, seeing all of the different expressions, from dance to slam poetry to our silly punk to proper theater to all of these different ways of expressing something that's extremely important for a lot of people and affecting their lives. And I think when you're dealing with political questions that are on such a big scale, like effects of climate change, or that the Norwegian politics can kind of ruin it for a lot of coastal communities along the coast of Norway. It's such a heavy topic.
Yeah.
And then how do you deal with that? A lot of people feel very powerless in the meeting, when in the interaction with these like bigger, heavier topics, and then you kind of need some way to release that energy. And I do think using different kinds of art is very relieving, and it brings like a certain feeling of connection, and you're allowed to just laugh and feel that you're contributing, and that you kind of regain some power through doing that. And luckily it also works, because you share a message, and you share the message in a very clear and concise way, so that people actually can understand it and react to it, and that the politicians aren't allowed to just like talk their language in a room in the parliament where no one understands what's going on, or it's too late to react to it.
I think you've so beautifully articulated why the arts is such an important part of our society, because you're right, when we're overwhelmed with these huge issues, it's really hard to know what to do with them, especially if you're not in positions of power where you can actually shift something in a way that feels meaningful.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to hear your story in this way, because it's so different from the music that I grew up with. You know, I've never really interacted with punk music, but after hearing you talk about it, and like it's something I I want to get involved in now and just set free.
What was the journey from being in the Cameltoes, working in a conservation organization, to taking a different direction and wanting to pursue something more folk pop, and then actually moving countries, moving cities? Where did that decision come from?
Since I think I always wanted to do music, but it was so important for me to be in my home area and fight this battle against the oil industry, that I felt that I couldn't leave, I couldn't pursue full on what I wanted to do until I've done quite a lot within that. And I do think the change came quite naturally as well.
The fisheries plan that you were protesting or fighting against back when you were younger, was that ever resolved, or is that decision the same situation that's happening today in the Norwegian Parliament? Did you ever get some kind of feeling that you had made a difference in that area?
Throughout the years that I spent working against oil production in my home area, one of the things we've used quite a lot was that we arranged this big music parties. Basically, we call it like the People's Party, and we would like get great artists, we would get like local food, and we would just meet on a public place and have like a full day where we were protesting by having a party and using culture as like this main activity of our protest. And this way of showing that we were not saying no to the oil industry, we were saying yes to all of these other things that we could develop in our hometown, like the local food production, renewable energy, culture, just like showcasing all of the opportunities who are there when you say no to something. So instead of focusing on the negative of saying no to an industry, we're saying yes to all of these other industries that we believed in.
That's great.
And this strategy eventually, over 10, 15 years of a lot of people in Norway, a lot of organizations in Norway fighting, eventually we managed to turn the vote in the parliament. So even though we have a right center, right wing government at the moment, the vote within the parliament itself is against oil production in Lofoten Islands. So after doing this work for years and years, our organizations and all of the people who decided to protest actually managed to do quite a big impact.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it was a very strange moment because it was after I've moved to Berlin, and my friends were calling me because we've just got the news that the biggest party in Norway, the Labour Party, had within their program decided that they will go against oil drilling in our area.
Wow.
You also have a solo project called Miss Nöyd.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that, and what does the name Miss Nöyd mean?
Miss Nöyd, it's the name in itself. It's a play with words in the languages of Swedish and Norwegian. Because when you say Miss space Nöyd, that means that you are Miss happy. But if you remove the space in between Miss and Nöyd, the word becomes missnoyd, which means that you are dissatisfied with the situation around you. So for me, it's a play in between that I always found myself in this line, this very narrow line in between being satisfied and dissatisfied. And I guess there's some kind of nostalgia in that, some kind of longing, some kind of melancholy, like always being balancing in between satisfied and being not so happy.
Did you already have your project of Miss Nöyd before coming to Berlin, or you just wanted to start really focusing on your music and decided to just come here?
No, I had my project because I kind of knew that I wanted to do music, but I didn't know how to grasp it. And I did have the punk band, which I really loved, and we were having so much fun with it. But then I always had some songs on my own, and since the music, since I had a guitar and I have my voice, that was kind of like the natural go-to, which I do think it's the reason for many people being in the folk pop scene. It's very accessible. You have, it's what you have. It's you're not dependent on anyone else. You just try from what you have in the moment. And then I remember a friend of mine had an apartment in Lisbon in Portugal and wanted to do a house exchange for 1 month. He really wanted to live in Lofoten, and he wanted to rent out his place in Lisbon for a month and exchange the houses. And for some reason at the time, it was fall, I didn't have anything to do. So I was like, why not? And that's when Miss Nöyd started, and I traveled via Oslo, borrowed a guitar there, tried like a song at some open mic or something, and then traveled to Stockholm where I bought my guitar, which is tiny enough to carry on board airplanes. I remember that was my argument as well for buying it.
Yeah.
And then and then I went to Lisbon and just by accident ran into some people who also had like a bar where they had live music, and I got to test some of my first songs. And I went back to Lofoten and had this newfound guts, I guess, or like courage.
Yeah.
That's the right word. So I do think like the Miss Nöyd, the folk pop project, it just felt natural to me because it was what I could do at the time. I could play some guitar and I can sing. So therefore I made this melancholic folk pop. And now, now in end of May, 22nd of May, I'm going to release the second single from that project. So it took me actually 3 years before I released any music on that project. But that was mainly because after moving to Berlin, I found so many other cool people to play with. And I also play in a band called Laguna, which is a post-punk band. And we had a lot of great shows.
But what is it like for you when you sit down and write a song? Is it something that you've found over the years that you need to do to feel okay? Or is it something that you sit down and you have the desire, I want to write a song and I need to just try and make something happen here? Or what's your songwriting process like?
That's such a difficult but very lovely question. Because I do think all songwriters should reflect more on like, how do you actually write songs? Because I do think for me as well, like most of the times it's because I feel something or I need to express something that I've thought about. Like I would be, let's say I go for a run and then suddenly I start thinking about like a lyric line or a melody, and I need to go home and I just need to sit down and record it and kind of try to capture it in a way. Like I know a lot of songwriters are talking about this feeling where you're kind of trying to capture this lightning in a bowl. And so, but then like, what's the process before that moment? And I do think for me, that process is just like listening to a lot of people talk, reading a lot, listening to a lot of music, watching a lot of movies. And for a while, I remember having this thought that you kind of had to search within to find some kind of inspiration. Yeah, so when you're asking me about the songwriting process, I'm talking maybe more about like, how am I finding the inspiration to write songs? And I remember cutting off listening to music and watching films and being inspired basically for a while, thinking that I could find some kind of inner inspiration. And by doing that, I realized that that's not my way of doing it. Like I need a lot of information in. I need a lot of inspiration from imagery and music and all the lovely people I'm surrounding myself with, and like how they express themselves and what they're engaged in. And then I need to cut off and just be in my room or a space where I can create some music, and then try to write it down. And I do think lyrics are often the first entrance into my songwriting, that I have some words that I want to express. And then I need to figure out a way to expressing them in a very precise way, but a way that's right for me. And then just like creating some music around that.
Yeah.
More than the other way around.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And where are you hoping to take this Miss Nöyd project? Do you have any ambitions with it, or are you open to whatever comes along? What's your dream?
Maybe both in a way. I think with all of my music, I wanted to take me around the world. And that does not necessarily mean like a huge production tour where there's packed of people and insane amount of money and production in it.
Yeah.
I mean, especially maybe with my La Laguna project, with the post-punk band, I think that has some kind of energy in it. That would be cool to play some bigger festival stages with that band. But for Miss Nöyd, it's more it's more, I guess my dream connected to that is that I want to tell some stories that people relate to in a way that they can invite me into their homes.
So can you tell us a little bit about your single that's coming out?
Yeah.
Yeah, what is it called? What language have you written it in? And yeah, tell us a little bit about that so that our listeners can go and find it when it's out.
When it's out. So my single is that is out on the 22nd of May. It's called Honest Mistake, and it's recorded live in Donau 115, this extremely charming jazz bar in Neukölln. And it's a one take live recording where I'm playing my guitar and singing, and Nina Vittala on the violin is just lifting the song with me.
I'm your lover, keeping you from staying sober, and I'm your mother, keeping you from growing older, and I'm just another.
So I guess Honest Mistake, it's about heartache, but it's about those heartaches that are kind of self-inflicted. That you know you're doing yourself wrong, but you're not able to step out of the situation or change anything. And it's like you spill a glass of milk, and of course it's not your fault, but sometimes maybe you're just not paying attention, or you know that you could have done something different. I'm very grateful for the life I'm living in Berlin right now. Like leaving a very tiny village, it feels like I'm just arriving in a new tiny village in a way. Like there's so many cool people that are extremely supportive, and I rarely meet these very negative competitive people. Almost everyone I meet have a tendency to be very heartwarming and supportive and interested in your work and your art and willing to share it and ask question and share passion instead of being mean or cruel. And I do find that so beautiful about Berlin and living here. Because I do think that's also part of me wanting to come here. It's like the punk city. It's the main city where people are free to express and free to be whoever they want to be in a very different way. So it's kind of like it's a shelter and a home for a lot of people. And I do really appreciate that. The possibility to just be in it and always discovering something new that inspires me and makes me want to live out my dreams and reach further with either La Laguna or Miss Nöyd or whatever music project I want to do in the future. Yeah.
I also would love to know, you mentioned earlier that you always had a lot of fear when it comes to music and putting yourself out there. And I think that's probably a really common theme for a lot of people who are creative, and probably a lot of women who are creative, but don't know how to step into the space and have the courage to make that first step. Is there anything you would say to people who are afraid right now and they have this dream and they have these desires, but they don't know how to just take that next step, or they don't know whether it'll be worth it? Or, what could you say from your experience of overcoming that fear and now being in a position where you're pursuing your dream and living in a different city What would you say to people who haven't done that yet?
Okay, I guess I would say if you look at your favorite artist or your favorite filmmaker or your favorite painter, and would you ever tell that person that they shouldn't have painted that painting, or they shouldn't have made that song, or they should have just stayed at home, or they should have done something else? They should have gotten a proper job, whatever that means. And you would never tell that to anyone else. So why on earth are you telling that to yourself?
I just got goosebumps.
And just realizing that you're free to do whatever you want, and you're only hurting yourself by not following your dream.
And what does it feel like when you actually are? Like for you right now, looking back, can you imagine what life would have been like if you had never applied, if you'd never followed through with going to the music school? What would that have been like for you?
I mean, I do also really believe that, especially maybe since I decided to start studying in my late 20s. Like, I do believe that there are so many different roads to wherever you want to go. So I maybe, like, my life would have been very different. I would maybe do something creative artistically, but it could maybe be through different different activities. I don't know how to say that. Like,
different medium.
Yeah, different medium. Like, I would maybe be very creative in working at a cafe, in the food I make or how I present my cafe, but it wouldn't feel right for me, and this I know. So that I think I think everyone is creative and you will always express that in a way. But when you find the way that you really want to be creative, like for me, singing and playing music is such an important part. So I would probably feel a certain kind of sadness if I didn't go for it. Because I do think everyone knows what they actually dreamt of. Like when I did make a decision to move from Lofoten to Berlin, I remember so many people coming up to me and being very supportive, but also just sharing their dreams. Like, oh, I actually wanted to be an architect, or I actually dreamt about becoming this and this and this. And they just never went for it. And when you choose to go there yourself, you're kind of, I do think you're awakening the other dreams within others, because they realize, like, okay, yeah, this was what I actually wanted to do.
Yeah, that's so true. I remember walking down a street in London one day with my guitar case going to a gig, and a man walked past me and he stopped and he pointed at the guitar and he was like, "Good on you. I wish I'd never stopped as a young person. I wish I'd kept going with it. Keep going with it." And it was just this beautiful interaction where I was probably feeling quite nervous about the gig, and I was probably would have preferred to just stay at home that particular night, and my guitar case was heavy and just that man saying it, I was like, yeah, one day I'm going to look back and I'm going to be really glad that I tried. No matter what happens, I'm going to be so glad I gave myself a chance to just do it and see. Bente, I want to be your friend. I feel so inspired talking to you. You have an incredible story. I want to come and hang out with you.
Yeah, I mean, you know where I live.
I do know where you live. It's
Amazing.
been such a privilege to talk to you and hear your story.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, our pleasure.
I feel like I know you so much better now.
And if anyone is interested in hearing Bente's music, of course, you can find her on Spotify and after the 22nd of May, go and find this new single and support this incredible artist who's doing incredible things and singing about amazing things. So that's what this podcast is all about. And we hope that, Bente, a few more people fall in love with your music after hearing your incredible story.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode.
To find out more about the Artwork podcast, you can find our links in the show notes, as well as all the links to today's artist.
And if you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you would take the time to rate and review it so that more people can find us in the future.
If you know someone who you think would be interested in the topics we've discussed today, why not share this episode with them?
You can follow us on Instagram at art.workconversation.
And if you're an artist and you want to join us for a conversation, feel free to email us at art.workconversation@gmail.com.